This is Leadcast, and I'm Jonathan Minold, and today the leader I'm profiling today is Chris, and Chris is a senior director in the Ministry of Citizen Services. He'll get into explaining what his job is, what he does, and how he got to where he is as a senior director, but basically, my understanding is he works with Freedom of Information requests and leads a team that does that sort of work. So, yeah, if you've ever put in a Freedom of Information request or know someone who has, or maybe that request goes to Chris or someone on his team. Maybe. I mean, I'm the one who talked to him, and I'm still not clear on it, but maybe if I listen to this again, listen to what Chris has to say again more closely, I'll get some more clarity on this. Yeah, so are you a Victoria person?
I am. Born and raised in Victoria. I've lived here all my life. Was born in the Royal Jubilee Hospital and went to Hillcrest Elementary School, Arbutus Junior High School, Mount Doug High School. Went to university here in Victoria, and I'm not sure what it would take to get me to move away from Victoria. I love the city.
It's so nice here, and we are, I think we're rare birds, you and I, in that I'm from Victoria as well, and I don't know about you, but I've not met that many people that are like homegrown Victoria people. A lot of people move here. A lot of people from Ontario, Alberta, but is that your sense too?
I have a select group of friends that I've still stayed in contact with over the years, and so other than that handful, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, huh. Well, I did move to Vancouver for a couple of years after university, but I moved back because it's just so nice here, you know?
I love Vancouver to visit. It's a little bit bigger than I would love for a city. One of the things about Victoria that's just so absolutely beautiful is that I can get from my house to downtown in 15 to 20 minutes maximum. And I live out by Rithitz Bog. And so within 5 minutes from my house, I can go for a walk out in nature and not feel like I'm anywhere near the city.
That's nice. In Victoria, there's no commuting unless you live in the West Shore, which my apologies to everyone who lives in the West Shore. But yeah, so when I was reading, I read a brief bio of you know the jobs you've worked, Chris, and your education and stuff, and I guess I'm curious about. I'm trying to understand the connection between your education and your work. So can you tell me, like, when you were going to UVic, like, what did you want to do with your education? Like, what was the thinking?
So for reference, I've got a degree in biochemistry. I did have some thoughts about working in lab work and the enjoyment of discovering something in the scientific process. And I learned after not too long in the lab that there's a different aspect that you don't think about, which is the social aspect. So I'm relatively extroverted. I do want to talk to people. I do want to see people. And my experience in being in the lab was that I would wake up early because I would have an idea I wanted to try, and I might be the only person in the lab. And then I would work a good half a day, midday, take a break, come back. There might be a few more people in the lab. I was seeing the same 3 or 4 people every day. In my job now, I have a building with 130 people that I get to see every day. So it's just so much more invigorating.
Right. I mean, we're probably different in that I was horrible at the sciences. I wasn't horrible, but I didn't enjoy science as much as I liked history and reading and writing, both, you know, undergrad and now. Like, I prefer to read about history and read fiction and stuff like that. So did you want to be a scientist?
For a long time, I think I did. But I also have a business streak in me. I jump around from thing to thing that kind of excites me. So while I was doing the work in science, I actually had built a house that I was planning to move into. And I wound up selling that house, and I made a few dollars doing that, which actually led to me partnering up with my dad and my uncle after they had recently retired, and doing a little bit of house building as well.
So what do you mean you built a house? Like you built it with your hands?
We designed it. I wasn't the builder. Let's say I was designing and financing.
Okay.
And then it wound up selling, and the timing just happened to work so well that my dad had just retired from his job, so I was able to pull him in. Building it with your hands would take a lot more time away from the office than I'd be able to pull off, which is why having a recently retired partner works really well, because he can be at the job site. I can work on doing paperwork, or I can work on getting things sorted through local governments and that sort of thing.
So when you're designing, like you're talking about designing a house, like are you doing drawings, like architectural drawings?
Working with the architect to get the drawings, yeah.
Okay. So you're kind of like project managing, you're directing people, saying that drawing's no good, do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my wife and I, we've been together pre-marriage, a total of about 12 years. And we were just counting the other day. We've lived in 7 places in 12 years, and 3 of those were houses that we designed and built.
Wow. Sounds like you move a lot. It must be tiring.
You get really good at it. You get really, really good at it. You get good at regularly culling the things that you don't need. And you also get really efficient at planning certain things and saying like, okay, well, maybe we won't move this from house to house, and we'll get rid of it and get something new.
Yeah, I guess that is an advantage. I helped my dad last year have a garage sale and get rid of some stuff. And like, it was like 20 years of stuff that he had never gone through. He doesn't really get rid of anything. So it's amazing how much stuff you collect over the years, for sure. So when did you decide, I'm not going to be a scientist? Forget this. I'm a people person. I want to interact with people. I need at least 100 people to interact with on a daily basis.
I don't know that there was a specific point. I've always been a very social person, so I was getting a lot of social interaction growing up through playing sports. And I wasn't playing as many sports anymore, and I was working in the lab, and lab work just wasn't fulfilling that social aspect the same way. And I was also working, at the same time, I was working at the liquor stores. That was a job that I had while I was in university, so I was an auxiliary on-call.
Student job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which had me with one foot in government already. And then an opportunity came up to potentially get an auxiliary position at the Ministry of Finance doing work in FOI. And I met with the manager, and I was able to get that position. So that started in the summer of 2007, and I've been doing work loosely in the information management field, whether it's FOI or other aspects of information management for the last 13 years.
So it sounds like you were... I guess I'm trying to figure out, did you make a conscious decision to like go into government because you didn't want to keep working in the lab, or was it more like just something that was available and you're like, well, this is an opportunity, I'm going to take it, and you enjoyed it, so you stayed? Like which of those was it?
I think probably more the latter. Getting into government made a lot of sense for me. My mom was a career public servant. So I'd seen what that looked like. My dad was 30 years in the police force, so public servant of another type, and I'd seen what that had looked like. And I knew that government was such a big employer that it didn't necessarily matter if I was getting in to stay in FOI, that getting into government and having access to the online postings and being able to see every job out there would either result in me really liking FOI and staying where I was, or having endless possibilities in front of me to go and jump off somewhere else.
There's a lot of jobs. There's a lot of jobs out there. That's for sure. That makes sense. It's like a really logical approach.
Going back to that science thing.
Yeah.
A lot of logic.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. So walk me through, you were doing centralized FOI stuff, right? Like you weren't embedded in a ministry, or were you? When
I got into the FOI space, it was actually all decentralized in government. So I had a job in the Ministry of Finance in the Corporate Services Division for Finance. They were actually called Corporate and Ministry Supply Services, I think, back then. And they served the Ministry of Finance, what was then Labour and Citizen Services, the Office of the Premier, and the BC Public Service Agency. So we had a small centralized office, but it was in a very decentralized fashion. And then government centralized all of FOI services in 2009.
Right.
So ever since then, it's been a central unit where I'm working right now called Information Access Operations in the Corporate Information and Records Management Office.
Huh. That's not a mouthful at all. Jeez. Do most of the requests that come in, are they from citizens, media, public interest groups? Like where are the majority of the, you're like, yes, all of those.
All of those, absolutely. We see about 12,000 requests that we're processing every year, representing around 2 million pages of records. So the analysts are going line by line through every one of those pages. And the requests, they'll come in from individuals interested in information government holds about themselves. Those are the personal requests. And the more general ones we'll get from individuals as well, from law firms, from media, from interest groups. And one of our biggest applicants is the political party.
Right. Yeah, I would imagine that all of those groups have an interest in getting some of that information. So how long does it take to turn around a request?
So we have a legal obligation to get records turned around, or a response, turned around within 30 business days. And there are certain exceptions to that where you're able to take time extensions. On average, I believe right now for all of government, for those 12,000 files we're closing a year, we're probably closing records on average with about a 45 business day turnaround.
Right. So I would imagine you get the request, and then you consider out like what you're going to need to do for it, and then you maybe give an initial response, and then you do some to get that 30-day within that time frame, get the response out, and then do all the legwork to get the actual docs, or what?
And they absolutely vary in size and depth and breadth. So you can get requests that somebody says, I'm really interested in what you have about alien interactions in Williams Lake, and probably going to turn around and no records response on those. So nothing to process. All the way up to, I know we've got
probably
files. Yeah, as far as I'm aware.
Probably.
And we've also got requests where we get somebody who says, give me everything you have on the following infrastructure project. And it might be 30,000 pages or 40,000 pages.
So how do those get, do those get printed, or are those sent out digitally, or and if so, who bears the cost of that?
The FOI system, we do charge fees in some circumstances, and the legislation allows us to charge fees in certain circumstances.
If it's a ridiculous size document,
it has to meet certain criteria, but we're certainly not cost recovery. Our budget for FOI in our branch is in the low millions. And our cost recovery, if we want to call it that, for FOI would be that we collect about $50,000 in fees every year. Right. So we would probably be government's worst cost recovery model.
But I guess, I guess the purpose of charging a little bit per page or whatever isn't necessarily to recover the cost, because it's a service that we want to provide to citizens and anyone that not anyone, but citizens, right? I guess the purpose is not to recoup all the costs. It's just to maybe put a little bit of a disincentive for people to request everything all of the time without.
It absolutely
it's
acts
a bit
as
of a speed bump,
bit of
right?
an incentive for folks to focus their request and really tell us specifically what they're looking for. Because you can get requests that say, could you please give me the briefing note that resulted in the approval of project X, or you could get a request that says, please give me everything you have in the 25 years preceding this request on the following project. Yeah. And the request for the briefing note is absolutely not going to attract a fee estimate. The one for 25 years worth of records almost for sure will. Yeah. And then the subset of that is that requests for your own personal information are not applicable for fees. So we're not charging you for wanting to know what government has about you.
Yeah, so if someone wants their information on a certain tax that they've paid or health records or this, that, or the other thing to do with them personally. They can
Quite regularly, the personal requests we see are folks who have had some interaction over the years with the Ministry of Children and Families, folks who have had interaction with social development and poverty reduction,
Right.
Or folks who have had some interaction with the corrections facilities.
Right. They want to see what was in the files about them, which I understand. So, I want to. Can you walk me through the different? No, I don't want to get into that just yet. But what I do want to say is that I've learned a couple of different things about myself in the different jobs that I've had over the years. Initially, I was a social worker for a number of years, and I think the thing that I learned most about myself in that role was just like how I deal with stress and how I can do that better. I worked in a couple of other roles as in one role as a contract manager. I really learned. In what situations I could build relationships really easily with stakeholders and what ones were more challenging for me and where there was growth. And then there were jobs that I learned, about my leadership style and stuff like that. Are there any jobs that for you that stick out that taught you something about yourself?
Yeah. I think every job I've had has taught me something in some way. Maybe some of the more recent ones have been things around, for example, when you're in a very busy workplace where there's a lot of work going on, maybe some time to self-reflect is very important, whether that's in the workplace and it's something that you've got regularly going, or whether it's that you're making the time to unplug and recharge when you're at home. Another one would be certainly in roles doing construction, and I just recently built a house that we moved into, so this is sort of top of mind for me. As you're going through construction, you will inevitably make some mistakes along the way, and sort of keeping in mind that even the most successful people will make mistakes, and also that your frame of reference is very important, because many people may look at my house and not realize the mistake that I believe I made because we've successfully changed what something was going to look like.
It's funny you bring that up, because a guest I had recently, and people aren't going to be able to find this because the episode isn't posted, but anyway, are you getting a call?
No, I'm going to turn vibrate off on that.
That's okay. If you need to answer it, that could be a new aspect of the show. We could answer calls on the air and give people advice or something like that.
That'd be fun.
Yeah. I lost my train of thought. I forgot do you remember what I was saying? I don't remember what I was saying. Anyway, we were talking about houses. Oh, recently. So mistakes, things that you think are mistakes and other people not necessarily recognizing that. Also the other way around, like I was talking about this with a guest recently about public speaking, how sometimes I feel like when I'm recording an episode or doing a speech or something, sometimes I feel like I've made a flub or I've screwed something up, but then I'll listen back to it and it sounds fine. And other people don't pick up on it. Other times I think something sounds great, and then you listen back and you're like, oh, that's not very good, So frame of reference, that's important.
I have a great example of listening back and realizing how poorly you might sound in public speaking. This is one that goes way back to when I was in high school, and the Vancouver Grizzlies were still a thing back then. And a couple of friends and I had gone over to Vancouver for the Grizzlies game. And before the game, we got approached and asked if we would like to sit courtside, which of course the answer is yes, but what do I have to do? And they said, well, all you have to do is at a timeout, we will come find you and you will sing a song of our choosing. and it'll be a competition, and whoever wins their section will win free pizza. And so a buddy of mine said, sure, let's do this. And we had to sing Great Balls of Fire, which I will not repeat, during a timeout. And we both sounded absolutely atrocious. His section won. And we later on got a videotape of it, watched it back, decided we both sounded terrible, burned the tape, and never spoke of it again.
It's, I've gotten used to it now because I'm doing this a lot more now. But it's pretty brutal the first couple of times you listen back, or when you watch yourself on video too. It's kind of a harsh, and you're like, nah, I don't sound like that. I don't look like that. But you do.
Yeah, absolutely. The other big public speaking one that I pretend is a good example of public speaking is I say when I delivered a speech at my wedding reception, and a lot of folks go, well, that doesn't count. But being from the East Indian community, our wedding receptions are quite large. So my wedding reception involved my 500 closest friends and family, some of which I wasn't really sure were my closest friends. Possibly they might have been through my parents.
Right.
500 delivering
of your
a
closest.
speech.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite the experience. And then you get to play it back and go, oh, okay, yeah, I did kind of stumble over that line a little bit. Maybe I could have delivered that a bit better.
Yeah. You seem comfortable with this mic, though.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoy being put into situations where they're new and challenging for sure. So,
okay. So is public speaking is not something you do a lot, or speaking on the mic is not something you do a lot, or?
I would say definitely not on the mic, and probably not public. But I do enjoy like getting up and talking to groups of people, and like previous lives playing sports, like I might be the guy that stands up in the dressing room trying to rally the troops.
Right. And you must do it in your job too, right? With like your team and stuff?
To some extent, sure. I mean,
leading meetings, that sort of thing?
in meetings, absolutely. I think our office dynamics sort of change over time. So we're in our branch, we're a pretty progressive group that's got a pretty good work from home program. So the face-to-face thing doesn't happen as much with all the staff as it maybe used to. We have staff that work potentially 3 days a week from home every week.
Mm-hmm. 3 days a week. That's
Yeah.
great. That's great. I know different areas have different ministries, and different even divisions and branches have different standards and rules about that sort of thing. What would you say to supervisors that are a bit nervous about letting their staff work from home as much as 3 days a week?
I think the big thing is trust in your staff. I mean, depending on the line of work you have, you might have things that are easily measurable or maybe not so easily measurable in terms of productivity. But when you trust your staff to do the right thing, they're going to. And the ones who don't, if that happens to be the case, you're probably talking about a different conversation anyways. That was probably an underlying performance conversation that needed to happen. In our experience, certainly we've been doing work from home in my branch. We started doing it about 5 years ago. It wasn't 3 days a week when we first started. It was trying it at one day and seeing what would happen with two. But absolutely, like I saw productivity in some cases go up in some places, and in some places stay at least the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you. I think, like if you don't trust someone to work from home, how is it you trust them to work in the office? Because you can't be looking over someone's, well, you could, but you can't be an effective supervisor looking over each of your staff's shoulder all day long, even if they're in the office. So why would that be different outside of the office? I think you're right. It probably just highlights a problem that if people are nervous about that, or there's probably another issue there, because
I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're comfortable delegating and empowering your staff to do the work that they're going to do, you're probably going to be comfortable without standing over their shoulder.
yeah,
And if you are the manager that stands over their shoulder, that might not be management best practice in today's world.
might not be. Very, very diplomatic of you, Chris. Thanks for that. Another thing that comes to mind while we're talking about this is, and I think we can do this sometimes nonchalantly, but I think one of the biggest things leaders do that are supervising people or hiring people is that decision to hire someone, because it impacts your team, it impacts the work, all of that stuff. And so, sorry, my glass just made a sound. But I think sometimes when there's a vacant position, a lot of people have this approach of like, oh my God, we got to fill it. And my view is if I can't get an amazing person in it, I'd rather it be vacant, because it can take a lot of extra time to do that performance management stuff, all of that. I wasn't meaning to go into that, but anyway, you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, because of the way our organization's actually set up, we're a very large organization with teams that are running in parallel. So our branches split up into sector-based teams, and each team will have a manager, team lead, FOI specialist, senior analyst, junior analyst, etc. We're actually in a position where we don't necessarily hire specifically for one vacancy. So we will typically run a large competition for an eligibility list. So at any given time, I probably have 7 or 8 people that are on my list ready to go if a vacancy occurs in an FOI analyst position. That's something that has taken some time to get put into place as a practice. But we've had examples. We often will open up our competitions to the public, so they're external facing competitions. And we've had examples at our AO18 level, the FOI analyst position, where we've gone to the public and we've had 150 people apply. And getting through that many resumes and that many written assessments, oral interviews, even just doing the reference checks, you're talking a number of months, which to have a vacant position in the FOI world where you've got a certain number of files going and legislative timelines throughout, you really don't want positions being empty for too long. So absolutely, I take your point about having the best people. We try to do that as much as we can sort of upfront with a list ready to go.
That's smart, because then you're not scrambling when you're trying to fill something, right? But it does take a bit more work up front to be proactive in that, right? But
yeah, it absolutely does, yeah.
Yeah. Tough for those people competing for those positions. 150 applicants. That's people want to work for the BC Public Service because it's a good employer. So So another thing I'm interested in asking is it seems like most of what were you expecting is what I want to ask when you started working for the BC Public Service. You mentioned earlier that you thought, okay, well, there's kind of 2 options here, very logical approach. I'm either going to love this job in FOI, or I can just kind of get my foot in the door and then move on into something else. Did you have a kind of vision for what for what work in the government was going to be like for you, where you wanted to go?
I think
what did you expect?
At a very high level, I had some sort of thoughts or goals. My vision would be that by a certain age, I would jump to management and then progress from there. But I wasn't really thinking in a specific field. I wasn't really locked into a certain position or even a certain ministry. And then the centralization of FOI is certainly, for me, gave a lot more opportunity, because you weren't necessarily in the old world where we were decentralized. You might not be a known entity to people who were running other FOI offices. And so to sort of get your name out there, or to build your brand up as somebody who was reliable or dependable or someone you could count on, was going to be that much harder to get that in front of another manager. But when you centralize the entire unit, we're all one branch, we're all physically located in one area, it became a lot easier to sort of sell yourself and to make sure that you were out front helping lead projects and taking part in the things that were actually going to impact the way the job was done.
So for leading projects, I think I'm just going to say, I think it's important to, if you want to progress, and my experience has been, if you want to take on more responsibility, one of the key things you need to do is to build equity in projects that you take on, either by starting something small that gains a lot of momentum, or else being attached to being slotted into a pretty heavy duty leadership position to something that already exists. For people that are having trouble with landing the position they want, with moving forward in their career, if they're interested in leadership roles, what would you recommend?
So I actually give this advice probably once a month to somebody that'll approach me. My process for this, again, trying to be somewhat logical, is to take a look at the job postings website to see the types of jobs you will be interested or you are interested in now but may not be qualified for, and take a look at the competencies that they're asking for, right? Take a look at those competencies and think to yourself, what stories do I have? What can I tell you about myself that's going to tell you why I'm a good fit and why I can actually demonstrate that I meet these competencies, and where you've identified pieces that you could maybe improve on, or where you've identified a gap where you actually don't have something where you could tell a story about your own knowledge, skills, and experience. Those are probably gaps you want to seek out. So when you're thinking about projects you might want to attach yourself to, or you're proposing some innovative ideas, try to make sure that you're addressing that gap in your work experience.
Right. So trying to figure out where, I think that's important. And I think what I would add to that is that before you move forward to whatever project or competency you want to develop or project you want to attack or whatever it is, I think it's totally important, like you said, to kind of assess where you're at, honestly. But that's kind of tough sometimes, especially if you've become a bit bitter, or you're not seeing the situation or yourself clearly. And sometimes it takes, in my experience, it takes, feedback from people that like really know you.
Absolutely.
Like
I was just going to say we could make this a step harder and make it tougher, and say that the best way to do that is not just self-reflection, but it's also to ask your peers, to ask your supervisor, to ask folks, if you already are a supervisor, to ask the folks who report to you and get some honest feedback from all directions.
Yeah. One thing I've done in the past is when I've asked to take on an acting role, I've approached the person that I want to act for, whether it's a team leader or manager or whatever. And I say, listen, I am interested in acting in this role, in leading this team if you're sick for a couple of days or if you go on vacation or whatever. And if they say, great, then great, you can take on that opportunity. If they say, no, I don't think you're quite ready or whatever, that is an opportunity, because if they're not thinking you're quite ready, there's something in your skill set or whatever that they're not seeing. And it could be as simple as building a good relationship with your boss. Like if your supervisor doesn't like you or whatever, like that's something you need to work on. But I think thinking about those things in terms of opportunity is important.
Absolutely. With your boss, with an extended network, if you've got one, or maybe working on establishing a network, if you don't have one. Work in the FOI space is really good for that, because like I said, we have sector-based teams. So if you're, let's say you're working for the health and education sector, well, you're going to build up a network of contacts in the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions and the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Advanced Education. So now your network is not just in your own ministry, but you've expanded it out even further. And those network connections are going to be valuable to you in terms of getting the feedback we talked about earlier, in terms of helping you potentially progress in your career if you put out some feelers and say, hey, if you hear of any job in this field, this is something I'm interested in. And maybe even in helping you get through some work-related problems if there's people that have experienced similar things in the past.
Yeah. What are you working on for your own development, like right now?
Right now,
I mean, not right now as you sit here, but like at this period in time, you're a director now, right?
Yep.
You're a director.
I'm the director of the branch.
We should have started with that.
That would have been a good intro. Yeah. I'm the We just recently reconfigured our branch so that we have 2 senior directors reporting up to the executive director. So I'm one of the 2 senior directors for information
senior
access
director.
operations.
Pardon me. Yeah, senior. I missed that piece. So as a senior director, you've been in government 13 years.
13 years in the information management space, if you include my time in the liquor stores.
Right, but longer in government,
yes,
right?
I just got my 20-year pin if
20
you
years.
include the time in the liquor stores and my my one summer as a student in the Ministry of what was then Transportation and Highways.
Man, you're a veteran. 20 years. So 20 years in, senior director. And maybe while you're thinking about that, maybe I can share what I'm working on. Or are you ready?
Either way, if you'd like to share first, you go for it. If not, I'll just jump in.
You are seriously so comfortable with this. This is it. You're really great at the on the mic talk. Seriously, a lot of people come in and they're scared of the mic and they talk like way back here or whatever. But you're like a natural.
And I definitely haven't done this before. I promise you. Things I work on all the time. I try to find things that are new to learn. So I'm looking for different books to read that are going to expose me to different things. Trying to watch if there's, I recently watched, and this is a weird thing to frame in terms of things you're working on to learn, but there was the Netflix documentary 3-part series called Inside Bill's Brain, and it was all about Bill Gates.
Yeah.
And it was really,
and the toilets.
really interesting. Yeah, exactly. And you watch that and you can take away things that you can maybe apply back in the workplace, right? Like my takeaways from that were things like, if you're optimistic and resilient, you can really change your perspective on the way that you're seeing the world. Like that's a powerful thing to take away from that, but you can see him and he's doing that in all 3 parts. You can see what I had mentioned earlier about taking the time to unplug and recharge. He does that week-long trip where he just disappears to the lake and he's doing nothing but reading. He's working on the self-improvement. His brain is turned off to the work stuff and his brain is turned on to the self-improvement and learning pieces.
He's got that bag of books. I remember that. The bag of books he takes everywhere. It's like, and he reads, what is it? Like, what were they saying? Like 150 pages an hour?
It was very intimidating, that part. I maybe read 2 or 3 books a year. I'm often busy doing other things, and I like to take a lot of my recharging time out in nature, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's quite a big thing, like to take those messages away.
He's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's things like that, whether it's things where I'm learning through reading, it's constantly keeping in touch with my sort of expanded network to see the things that they're working on and what things are challenging them. I will oftentimes read articles I can find online about leadership and also communications. Like communications is very, very important to leadership. And I think some people have some leadership qualities and they find themselves in leadership positions and they don't necessarily work on the communications piece. And to me, if you're a really good communicator, it's only going to help in your ability to inspire others, to demonstrate that you've got commitment and passion in a certain area, and just to you've got this compelling vision or you've got this purpose for folks. And if you're able to communicate that effectively, it's so much more likely that people are going to respect your leadership and want to follow you.
Mm-hmm. So on the communication piece, I think there are a bunch of different types of communication and types. That's not what I want to say, but different formats of communication, right? And one of the ones that I've been trying to work on in particular lately is presenting, because I've kind of learned through osmosis a little bit in this role that I'm in, that being able to present to other leaders, to be able to influence them, to be able to get in front of executive with a presentation and demonstrate that you're competent, you can speak well, and you can answer their questions on the fly is very important. And I, to be honest, before this year, I did not really know that. I mean, you probably know this because you've been around for, twice as long as
I've delivered a few presentations.
Yeah, but I was kind of before this year, I thought, okay, well, I read a lot. I can write fairly well. I can write really well. I'll be honest. I can write well, and those are kind of my strengths. But I wasn't so strong on the presenting side of things, and over the last few years, that came through in a couple of situations where I was kind of thrust in front of one situation where I showed up for a meeting and I was asked to give a presentation to the board of directors that happened to be there of this organization. And so I was surprised by this, but and it's a tough situation to be in for anyone. But I guess my point is I didn't have presentation skills to fall back on. Like I didn't know how to take a bunch of key ideas, parse them out, and kind of present them clearly and slowly to people, and then to hammer home the key points, and then to come back for questions and solicit feedback and vary the tone of my voice and the speed of my voice in terms of how fast I'm talking, and like all of those things that you learn when you're presenting.
Right.
I didn't have any of that, and so the last year I've been trying to learn that, to learn how to do that better and improve that aspect of my skills and competencies. Is there anything else like that for you?
I think
right now,
I mean, I enjoy when I was thinking of communications, a lot of the things I've been reading on lately has been more issues management, crisis communications type aspects, where it's not necessarily something that comes up in my day-to-day job right now, although we do sometimes have issues that come from freedom of information requests, but more so like as you're moving up in leadership roles and how you're expected to know how to respond to something, and how a non-response or the wrong response can set you down the wrong path from the very beginning, and it's very hard to recover from. So that's sort of a piece that I've really been focusing on with communications the last little while.
Yeah. That makes sense. So another thing I want to tap your logical, scientific brain about is kind of a more emotional component of the work we do and of career development, because you don't always, the projects that you're hoping for don't always go through. You don't always get the opportunities that you're hoping for. So how is it you deal with professional heartbreak?
Am I allowed to say that I visit the BC liquor stores? My
You're
favorite
allowed to
bottle
say
of
whatever
scotch.
you want. Yeah.
It is hard. I mean, one of the things I've sort of taught myself over time is that when you're pitching a project or you're pitching an idea, hopefully you've picked the right window with the right conditions in place for that project. And if your project doesn't go forward, or if something happens and it doesn't work, you really want to spend some time reflecting back on why that was the case. So if you have an idea of what conditions were in place when you pitched it and your idea didn't go forward, find out why. Because that idea might not be dead. It might just go in your back pocket, and you wait a little while till the conditions are better, and maybe you might bring that idea back up again. Or if you happen to have some influence over the conditions, maybe you can move some of the conditions to places where the idea is a more favorable place. That would be probably one of my big takeaways, is spending the time, I guess, at the front end too, assessing what the conditions are. So hopefully you don't find yourself in a position where you're getting the professional heartbreak. But on the flip side of that is really trying to understand, was there one factor? Were there two factors? What specifically were those factors? Sort of what's pulling the project away from success, and what can you do to either eliminate those factors or push back hard against them?
Can you give me an example of when that happened for you?
With FOI, there's often things. That's a tough one. That's a really tough one. Without giving away certain parts of the process that maybe I wouldn't necessarily feel as comfortable talking about. But absolutely, there have been ideas. Let's talk about there were certain streamlining ideas, and I can get into generalities without pinning down specifics. Certain streamlining ideas that maybe we had in the FOI process that involved external partners, and the external partners weren't always as easy to influence to get things done the way we might want them. And they weren't necessarily going to be easily convinced just by us saying, here's the way we'd like to see things, and it will be easier for us. And nor would that necessarily be the best explanation for things, because we are in a client service organization, and we're taking work away from the client. We're not trying to give work to the clients. But in 2012/2013, my then colleague and now boss and I, as well as our boss at the time, went through and became Lean Green Belts. And we were a part of the government's first corporate Lean project to start working on the FOI process. So it was a great opportunity, even though previous windows might not have been open for some of those streamlining initiatives, to get them slotted in as part of the Lean project and to get things streamlined in a way that we might have had a vision for.
So Lean Green Belt, is it like karate, you go up to black, or what's the deal here?
I think it goes up to black. I have to say I've been probably not doing as many Lean projects as I could to keep up with my designation. So I did the FOI one with Chad Hoskins, who's my executive director right now, and we were both managers at the time. And then I subsequently did a project with BC Mail Plus, working with them on a process. But that was 7 years ago.
Yeah, I didn't know I had no idea there were belts until now. I had no idea. That's good to know.
I'm not sure with government having taken over the training. I don't know if they're still doing belts or what the classifications are. When Lean was first coming out for the BC government, it was actually Fujitsu that was delivering some of the training. So you did take Lean 101, I believe it was, and maybe 201 through the public service portal, and then you went and did your green belt through Fujitsu. So there was a class of about 20 of us, I think, across government that were in the class that I was in.
Right. How about when things aren't going the way you want them to? I mean, granted, we don't want to get into the specifics because there are certain things you can't talk about in terms of the process. But let's talk about you personally in terms of when things aren't going exactly the way you want for yourself or for the team or for where you're at in your career. How do you deal with those sorts of things? Do you allow yourself to be like upset about it, or are you just like, nah, I'm just going to channel this into...
I don't know how much time I would spend being upset about it. I might allow it for a minute or two. And then to me, it's just a challenge. It's another challenge in front of you. And the way you tried to do something didn't work. So it's not that the thing that you did landed flat. It's not that you failed at doing the thing. It's that you got to try something different. You've got to try it another way, maybe at another time, but maybe another way right now. And it's just a new challenge for you to get through. So like that's my perspective on it is if I'm not getting the things that I need for self-fulfillment or for career growth or for whatever the scenario is that it's probably just a different challenge that I have to find a different and unique way to get there.
Yeah. I've noticed that for myself, I'm a lot less hung up on disappointments at work or professionally or whatever, since I've been in a good relationship, mm-hmm. because I'm a lot more with my partner, and she's like, I'm a lot more calm and just happier in general. So when the small things or even big things go wrong, I just feel like I'm not, it's not the end of the world, you know? But yeah, is family important to you?
Yeah, family's hugely important. So both in terms of like my wife is very supportive of the work I do or the time I spend trying to learn things, and is a great sounding board if I'm trying to bounce an idea off of her and say, how does this sound? Does this make sense? What flaws do you see in what I'm saying, and how might I deliver that better? And of course, I'll reciprocate and kind of help her out with things. And outside of that, like family is key. I actually my parents, because I grew up in Victoria, they're still here in Victoria. So once a week, actually, my wife and I go over to my parents' house for dinner, and my sister, her husband, and my two nieces are there. And we make it a weekly thing. It's every single Thursday night. I'm over at my parents' place having dinner.
Huh. How did you and your wife meet?
So she tells the story way, way, way better than I would. So when this podcast goes live, look up and Gag at Jobs, Economic Development, and Competitiveness, and she'll probably tell you a better story. But I'll tell you my version of the story. Yeah, she's a manager, manager of economic policy.
Oh, okay.
But my version of the story, and this is probably going to embarrass her that I'm sharing this. We have lots of friends in common, and her brother, 5 years younger than her, is actually good friends, or was when they were in high school, good friends with my sister, who's also 5 years younger than me. And so one day when she was bored, she was on the internet, and she was on a site called High Five. I don't know if you remember that. It was kind of like MySpace, Facebook, one of those kind of websites. And she saw my profile as a friend of a friend and just reached out and messaged me. And we chatted online, and it turned out that we actually both worked at 617 government at the time. And so we wound up going out and kind of went from there. Now, there's a whole different backstory where she's actually 1 day older than I am, and we were born in the same hospital. And flowers that were meant for me, actually, or for my mother, accidentally got delivered to her mother.
No way.
And that's the story that I am no good at telling, but she is a phenomenal storyteller. And so we had all these interactions where we could have possibly interacted many years before we met. We didn't meet until we were in our mid-20s. But I'm sorry, I guess I mean after the room where they keep all the babies at Royal Jubilee, we didn't meet until we were in our mid-20s. And that was because she had went to a private school when I went to public school. So we actually had many friends in common that we realized after we met.
That's wild. That you guys got each other's flowers?
Yeah.
That's wild. So, wow. And you guys met online before it was, I was going to say cool, but common to meet online.
Yeah.
Now everyone
it's very weird to say, do you know about a website called High Five? And then I didn't want to go on the website, so I told her just take my MSN Messenger and message me on there. Like, this is how far back we're going. It's only
MSN Messenger. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. Man, I was on that a lot. That was fun. Yeah. So in terms of what do you think are the skills that have helped you the most move through the different positions you've been in? What are the skills you've leveraged? Because we talked a bit about at the beginning. We talked about, you're a biochem. You went to UVic and did biochemistry, and so you kind of had that analytical mind, that analytical approach to things. And you leveraged your experience in government to move, into a couple of different roles, and specifically in the space of FOI. But what are the, and we talked about competencies as well, but what do you think are the skills for you personally that have been the most helpful for moving between jobs and areas?
I think there's a few pieces to that. Curiosity and a desire to innovate. So I always find myself wanting to change things and figure out better ways to do things, even if they're fully functioning the way they are, but saying like, how could we have done that better? So that innovative mindset, I think, is an important one for giving yourself good stories for the competencies, as well as getting those competencies built up in the first place. We talked a little bit about communication skills. Absolutely. I feel like I've got decent communication skills. And that definitely goes a long way in being able to sell yourself through the competition process. I would say I'm fairly confident in the decisions that I make, and I'm able to make timely decisions, and being accountable and transparent in the way that you work, in a way that people kind of think is authentic, right? I try to do everything sort of open and in front of folks so that they can see this is why we're doing this thing and this is why it makes sense to me. And I think that goes a long way. And Absolutely. On the flip side of that, though, I have looked at job competitions where I've been interested in the position, and I've done that analysis where I've given the advice to other folks, where I've said, here's a competency I think I need a better story about, or here's one that I think I need to work on building up a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Do you have a sense of what is next for you in your career? Like what you want to do next?
It's a tough one. I'm really enjoying the work that I'm doing right now. So, there's some challenging projects that we're working on that I think kind of seeing them through to fruition and seeing where they go will be interesting sort of next steps. And from there, it'll really depend on sort of what's available. I mean, a big thing for me is not just sort of like moving on and moving up, but where are you moving to? What's the environment where you are potentially going to? What are the people like? All of that stuff. I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I can consider those things to be pretty important to any future position that I would take.
How far in advance do you plan?
I would say I'm always thinking about building my skill set. So I'm kind of always planning in that way. But if I'm actually looking for a specific job, it would be, through my network, hopefully finding out the jobs available and maybe planning for it. But it wouldn't be a long-term planning thing, maybe within weeks or months of thinking things through. I mean, like, I'm a senior director now, so my obvious next step would be executive director. If I was looking at executive director positions, I would sort of look at what competencies I need more generally for executive director positions. So in that respect, I'm planning probably even right now. But then to actually
probably even right now.
But then to say specifically what job I'm interested in, it would actually probably take me knowing a specific job is available and knowing something about it.
Yeah. That makes sense. If you could, this is a question I've asked to a number of, and you've listened to a couple of the episodes, right? Or one of them?
I've listened to all 4 that have been released so far.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for being a genuine fan. That's great. I have a question that I've asked to a couple of people. I'm going to ask it again just because it's something that I think provides some insight into the growth of people in their careers and what they wish they had known or whatever at the outset of their careers. So if you could go back to younger Chris, working maybe just after working in the for the liquor distribution branch or liquor store or whatever, getting your first job in government. And if you could give yourself some advice or some words of wisdom in terms of like how things are, what to focus on, what to not worry about, what sort of advice would you give Chris?
That's a really tough question.
Knowing what you know now.
Yeah, I think that piece about what to focus on is a good piece. And I would look at sort of saying to younger Chris, don't get inside your own head so much. There are times where I can be really perfectionist about the things that I'm working on. And it's easy to kind of get inside your own head and say like, well, this thing wasn't good enough, or you should have produced something quicker, or you should have produced something better. And just sort of, if that happens, what I mentioned earlier in our conversation about even the most successful people sometimes making mistakes, you can get over that and you can get through that. And like, when you get inside your own head, you sort of think like, okay, well, maybe everybody's thinking I screwed up, and most people are worried about the thing that they're working on themselves. So they're not actually paying so much attention to something you feel like you might have screwed up, unless it was a significant mistake. And I've been lucky enough, knock on wood, that none of these things were significant mistakes.
Yeah. It's like that quote, I forget who said it, and someone will, I'm sure, send me a note and tell me where this quote is from, but it's something like, you would feel a lot more relaxed about yourself if you knew how little people thought about you.
That's a great quote.
Because
Absolutely.
It's something like that. It's like everyone thinks, because we're the center of our own universe for everyone, right? In terms of our perspective, we're looking out from where we're at, looking at other people, and we can sometimes get in our own head, like you said, about, oh, what do they think? But like, people are often too busy thinking the same thing about themselves. They're not so worried about.
Right. And in the meantime, if you're doing a good job and you're delivering and you're consistent, you're kind of going to build your own brand around that anyways. It's not going to be where other people remember that one mistake you made out of the 1,000 times they asked you to do something, even though that one might be the thing that's sticking in your head.
Yeah. I remember I used to, when I was a social worker, sometimes we would communicate with our contracted counsel, like external counsel that we had contracted with to do some of the legal work for our area. And I remember it was, I don't know why this is, I think it was maybe because like at one point I was interested in being a lawyer, so I kind of cared what the lawyers thought for some reason, because I was like, that's something I wanted to do, but didn't really have the the perseverance to go through law school or whatever to do that. But I remember thinking, like, really beating myself up when I would have a typo in my email that I sent to the lawyers, and I wouldn't even get that upset when I would send an email to my boss that had a typo. But for some reason, if there was a typo that went to the lawyers, I would be like, oh my gosh, I would beat myself up. But you're right. People are so busy with their own stuff that they're like, as long as they can read it, you know what
exactly.
you mean, you know? Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add? Do you feel good?
I feel good.
Good.
This was a fun experience. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
That's good. Good. Well, thanks for coming and chatting with me, and I'll let you go so you can get to your next appointment. Thanks so much for coming in, Chris.
All right, thanks, Jonathan.
That was my conversation with Chris. Chris builds houses. He leads a team that works with Freedom of Information requests. He was born like in the same hospital during the same time that his wife was born, but they didn't even know. That was such a wild story, man. I got to get his wife's version of the story, because he said that she can tell it better. Not that Chris didn't tell it well, but wow, that's wild.